Today is March 24th, 2024. This is episode 67 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade. Today, Joe and I will go over a rather big coaching hire that includes one of our teams and the round of 32 action from Saturday. So, Joe, Dusty May is going to Michigan. It appeared like he was going to be the next Louisville head coach. Looks like Ward Manuel may have pulled off a pretty impressive hijack here.
I was pretty stunned. I was under the impression most of the day that Dusty May was going to go to Louisville. We talked about it on here a few times. I think you and Mike touched on it as well. I do think Louisville overall is probably a better draw than Michigan. However, you look at Dusty May's ties, a Midwest guy overall, grew up in Illinois, worked under Bobby Knight as a student manager. So this probably could have been all about fit, Sean. I think, any objective college basketball fan would tell you that Louisville, the lone show in town, plenty of history there, but really has done nothing since Pitino left. I think Chris Mack had a good few years, but, ever since then, it's just been a train wreck. And at Michigan, you don't really have that, sure. I think the last 2 years, including this year, were extremely disappointing, but there has been a lot of success there. Even Jawad, he went to two Sweet 16s, went to an Elite Eight. So the foundation is there. I think what's interesting, and the deal is for 5 years, averaging 3.75 million. That just came out as we went live here. I do think it's going to be interesting to see how he adapts. If Michigan's going to be lenient toward transfers, FAU, particularly talking about Janelle Davis and Vladislav, those guys have an extra year of eligibility because of COVID. Traditionally, they did their 4 years, but they have 1 year left. It's going to be interesting to see if Dusty could get any one of those guys over. I do think he's going to have to hit the portal hard, and he's going to have to make some phone calls to the 2024 recruits because there's some pretty good ones. Christian Anderson's one of the best shooters in the country. Fat Darrell Brooks, that is his actual name, so I'm not making that up. PHAT, by the way, for our listeners. Was Mr. Basketball in the state of Michigan. So holding on to those two guys is going to be a big deal, as well as getting some of his guys, hopefully from FAU and throughout the country. But I do think it's interesting that Dusty chose Michigan over Louisville. My guess is that would be all about fit. I think Louisville definitely could have matched 3.75 million a year. And, someone brought up an interesting point, Sean. Maybe Dusty likes being the sideshow. He's a very mellow guy. We see him in a lot of media presence. He does great in front of them, but he's not this big, vibrant personality of a Calipari, a Pitino, even a Hubert Davis. Probably a little less exuberant than that. So I think Michigan probably got the name in the coaching cycle. I think people who wanted to, especially at Louisville, who wanted to draw the names of Jay Wright, Calipari. I think they probably got the hottest candidate in the not in the portal, but in the cycle. So, Sean, what are your takes as a Hoosier fan?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things here that first, Dusty, like you said, was the hottest name. He reportedly had offers from Louisville, Michigan, and Vanderbilt. It's a good sign that he picked Michigan. I'm not entirely surprised. I think we'll talk about Louisville in a little bit, but when he was hired at Florida Atlantic, they had 5 winning seasons in their program's history. And he has now rattled off 6 in a row there, including 2 years in a row in the NCAA tournament, both of which were good enough for at-larges. Obviously, they won the Conference USA tournament last year, but they got an at-large bid this year. So I think Michigan fans who are not happy about this really have to take a look in the mirror. And with the state of their, not that it's in horrible, horrible shape, but how things have gone the last 2 years, you're not going to get somebody better than this. And like you said, he can bring over some of his seniors. I would expect them to go with him. After their Final Four run last year, he kept everybody on that team when they most certainly had opportunities to go elsewhere. That's another good sign. And he's very much the modern basketball coach, very analytical. Might not be able to play the 4 guards in the Big Ten, but we'll see if he can find sort of like maybe a 6'7", 6'8" stretch 4 to play. Because Golden, he's not going to be he's still going to be pretty solid in the Big Ten. He might not be first team all conference, but he's a solid player. And then Janelle Davis is, got some NBA prospects if he does play well. So I'm really impressed by Michigan. impressed by Ward to get this one across the line, and he'll hit the portal. He has to. I don't know if there's any players left, Joe. I don't think, and he certainly would say they're staying no matter what before the next coach was hired. But he has work to do. I would, he did take a couple years to get FAU off the ground. It was 500 the first 2 years, so patience, Michigan fans. Can't be running him out the door if he's like 15 and 16 in year one. But I think it's a great hire for him, and I think he's an excellent coach, even though he did kind of get packed up by Chris Collins a couple days ago. But now we'll move it over to Louisville, Joe. This is a little bit shocking that he didn't take this from me. If you remember last cycle, Kenny Payne was sort of out of nowhere, an NBA assistant. He was certainly not their first call. And again, it appears like Louisville's not going to get their first choice. Has to say something about the state of that program.
Yeah, Sean, and I hope I'm getting the athletic director's name correctly, Josh Heard. He was significant in getting Jeff Braun back there. I think that's been a great coaching hire of late. And I only bring up football because I like judging, the four major sports. You're going to be judged on how you hire and how you retain those. That's why I've been so critical of Ward Manuel at Michigan. But if history shows anything, Jeff was a really good hire year one. One thing I don't like is probably the timing of this. I think it's pretty interesting that Michigan was able to get Dusty's side probably less than 32 hours after his team was eliminated. And Louisville couldn't do that. I find that pretty surprising. Where they go from here, Sean, I think our guess could be as good as anyone's. Even the field of 68, they're pretty plugged-in guys. They don't even know. They're throwing names like Shaheed Holloway. Shaheed Holloway's a New Jersey guy.
Yeah.
He's not Southern.
And he hasn't made the tournament in either of his years in a power conference. I think he's an excellent coach, but
yeah,
Holloway's, would he even go there? Probably not.
Yeah, no. So all the names out there are probably... I feel like this could have a Mick Cronin-esque hire to UCLA in terms of a guy that's probably not in the top 5 of projected candidates. That's the kind of field this is going for. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably just unexpected. I think some Louisville fans will panic, but ultimately it's still an attractive job. I think Dusty spurring Louisville for Michigan may have a little negative, may put a little negative energy out there, but no, Sean, I do think, I think one thing, this is what I wanted to bring up, I've just remembered. Do you think this could also have to do something with the ACC's lack of stability? The Big Ten, for all of its purposes, is pretty stable right now, all the programs coming in there. You think that has any factor in this?
I mean, I was talking with some people yesterday about whether Louisville was a better job than Michigan or not. And the conference is the main pull for Michigan over Louisville. The ACC is not what it used to be. And they've had very few tournament teams a couple years in a row. Now, Duke and Carolina did make the Final Four that year, but they only had 2 other teams in the tournament, and they were both on the bubble. So, obviously the ACC is more like the American Conference than it is the Big Ten. And I think something needs to be said about that. Obviously, NC State's going on a crazy run right now that we'll get to later, but I think maybe not the instability of the conference, but just the lack of strength from the conference could be a play. The Louisville AD has said multiple times he wants somebody without a past. Well, most good coaches do have a past, and the ones who you'd think would be up for this job, whether it's Will Wade at McNeese, Sean Miller at Xavier, Chris Beard at Ole Miss, they all have something that they did wrong in the past. So I don't know where they'll go here. Pat Kelsey's been linked to the College of Charleston coach. Him and Holloway seem to be the hottest names right now. Kelsey has done a really good job at Charleston, but he's probably pick 5 or 6, and it's understandable not to get too thrilled about pick 5 or 6 when you're trying to hire somebody. So we'll be sure to
Sean, real quick.
Or go ahead, Joe.
Someone posed a question. Someone actually last night while Dusty was hired, someone who listens to our podcast, Noah, asked me, who do you think Louisville could hire from the Big Ten? And this is just going to be a stretch. I want your answer too. Perhaps Fred Hoiberg. I think his team's pretty old at Nebraska. Tominaga's leaving, and maybe he feels he maxed out at Nebraska. I know they lost to A&M. I'm sure they could win that game on other days if A&M didn't shoot that well. But is Nebraska really going to compete with the big powers in college basketball? Louisville's showed they can. I don't think Nebraska has, and I don't think it's a criticism of them. And this new AD is a big deal, um, pulling him over. So if that's not a good fit, that's something to definitely keep an eye on.
Yeah, he said a lot of good things about Nebraska. So for him to go back on that right now, I think would be pretty un-Fred Hoiberg like. The AD situation is, they've got an interim in there right now, I'm sure. But I think the former Big Ten name, maybe Shrews, gets a look at Notre Dame. Um, but, he was at Penn State for 2 years, Notre Dame at one. Would he really move again? Like, I don't know. So, um, yeah, we'll see what Louisville does. A lot of questions and not a lot of answers so far. Joe, we'll get to the action yesterday. And Arizona picked up the first win of the day on the first game, which the first slate was in Salt Lake City, which was odd, 10:45 local time tip. Not sure why they did that. Whether there was they wouldn't be switching the floors over, or maybe they would be switching the floors over for the Jazz at night. I don't know, but Arizona gets by Dayton. Dayton did hang around, made it a little bit interesting, but Caleb Love is continuing to play really well in the NCAA tournament. You think the Wildcats can go on a deep run?
Absolutely, Sean. And even in this game, as Dayton inched closer and closer, you just felt like Arizona's offense could not be stopped. And that was something we saw clearly in their loss last year and in years past with Tommy Lloyd, and he's done a phenomenal job there. But sometimes their offense would just go stagnant, for 2-3 minute stretches. The fact they have a cheat code in Caleb Love is such a luxury for them. And honestly, we'll get into North Carolina a little later. I'm having a hard time seeing either of them losing their Sweet 16 games. It's maybe a little too early to say that, but based on what I saw, Arizona probably had a B minus performance yesterday. It's still, I understand Dayton's not the greatest team, but they still beat a team in the NCAA tournament pretty handily without having to exert much. So that was my impression of Arizona. What was yours, Sean?
It's been two low stress wins, and Tommy Lloyd and Arizona have had very few of those in the tournament in his now third year there. We'll see do they have an opponent yet? They do not. So one of the winners today. But I've been impressed with how uninteresting their games have been so far, and that's a great sign if you're a fan of their team. Not great for the neutrals who love typical March moments, but they have. I've watched their games, but I haven't really been locked in because they've been over quickly, which is a good sign for them because Long Beach was a pretty good team with a good story in the first round, and now Dayton, who was in the top 25 for most of the year. So Arizona moves on to the Sweet 16. Game 2 in Salt Lake, Joe, is Gonzaga and Kansas. Kansas did lead this game 44-43 at halftime, but the Zags used a 46-24 second half to end up winning this game by 21. Kansas, unfortunately, season came to an end pretty abruptly and quickly. We'll talk about Bill Self's comments later, but while we did see Kansas kind of hitting the wall with their offense and lack of depth, this was pretty extreme.
Yeah, I thought, in the first half, this had the makings of an all-time classic game. It was probably one of the most entertaining first halves I've ever seen in the NCAA tournament. And I want to highlight this, Sean. Gonzaga finished the game 60% from the field. And 4 of their 5 starters, 15-plus points. 5 guys in double digits. I don't know what it is. I think Kansas, it's exactly what you said. They probably exerted their limit in terms of their resources here. But can you pinpoint effort on this, too? You think Kansas probably has the lead kept going to 10-12, and they realized no matter what they did, it was staying that way. You think that probably played a factor to this?
I mean, maybe, but they did. They only had 20 something points in the second half, so it's pretty. A lot of teams let their offense dictate their defense, and that happened here. Gonzaga made a couple shots, and then to shoot 60% from the field, you obviously have to make some shots, but if you're playing good defense, the team's not going 60% from the field. And I thought they folded pretty harshly. And if you look at the minutes, you got 2 players really who played off the bench. It was even less so in the first game, and they just didn't have the horses to really come to this fight. And while they did actually play really well for the first 20 minutes, I thought the offense was moving, the ball was zipping around. Um, you got to build yourself a lead when you play that well. And I had no doubt Gonzaga was going to win this game, even after that first half. And Joe Mark Few makes his ninth straight Sweet 16. Obviously, kind of lucky with the draw in Kansas, but got to give the Bulldogs credit. They got the job done.
Yeah, Sean, and that streak is remarkable. I think a lot of people pinpoint the Bill Self and Tom Izzo tournament streak, and rightly so. I think that's as impressive as any record out there. But tied straight Sweet 16s with completely different casts, like even getting when Michigan got to, I believe it was five straight Sweet 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah, five straight Sweet 16s. That was hailed as like one of the trademarks in the Big Ten, right? Gonzaga's done nine, and the way they've performed the last, I mean, all nine of these tournaments, very little indication that they're not going to get 10 next year. I know that's jumping way too ahead, but for them to have McNeese picked over them so much, I think that was a lot of respect for what McNeese did this entire season. But there's definitely a level of disrespect that goes into Gonzaga. I think they've proven themselves as an elite program in this country. And I understand that they've only been to two Final Fours, and for what they've had, that's probably a little less with more, that old saying. But, I mean, Sean, come on. You have to tip your cap at some point. And I think Mark Few and the Zags are an elite program, and I think people just need to get that through their head at this stage.
Yeah, they heard all the talk that it was a down year for Gonzaga, how they're not as good as they usually are. Well, they still weren't in the regular season, but when you get a draw like this, all you can do is win it. They smacked a good McNeese team, and then they beat Kansas by 20. Beating Bill Self by 20 is not very easy. Even he could take 5 players from the local men's league and compete for 20 minutes, which he did. But yeah, Gonzaga moves on. One of the years they were at 11 seed in that Sweet 16, which was pretty good. Obviously, they have been a top 4 seed very frequently, but still, it's hard to do that 9 years in a row because you don't know injuries, draw, an 8-9 seed that gets hot. We've seen it all, but Gonzaga really hasn't. Next game, Joe, we got Michigan State and North Carolina. The Tar Heels end up winning by 16. In control for most of this one, Michigan State was certainly not out of it, but the Tar Heels get the job done, and new era for Michigan State is on the horizon.
Sean, I thought Michigan State in the first 12 minutes played as well as they have all year. Matty Sissoko getting buckets in general was shocking. Jackson Kohler being a net positive on offense. And Tyson Walker, he just played free, running down the floor, drilling threes. Even on the fast break, he had no hesitation on pulling up. Tom Izzo gets criticized a lot for, their offense often settling for contested twos, just trying to do everything modern basketball argues against. But in the first half, I thought Michigan State's offense flowed very well. And that even includes when UNC won that 20-3 run. And I defend Izzo a lot on this podcast. One thing I did not understand is how he did not call a timeout in the middle of that 20-3 run. You could see the crowd was not into the game. When Michigan State had that 12-point lead, it took a lot out of the crowd. And for him to let the crowd and UNC back into it without giving his guys a breather or readjusting is pretty shocking. The one thing I disagree with what you said, Sean, I think Michigan State had plenty of opportunities, especially in the first 10 minutes of the second half, to get not even momentum. I think they could have had control of this game. There were so many instances where, A.J. Hoggard, he's been criticized enough this year, but certainly yesterday was anything but his finest performance. Going in against double teams, getting a shot blocked. I really think that nullified a lot of the good things Jaden Akins did. I thought these last 2 games has shown what he can be, and that there's not necessarily an empty amount of talent on that team next year either. If they get Xavier Booker and some other guys to stay, but they needed elite guard play in this game. They needed one of their forwards to do something. I thought Malik Hall was good at times, but definitely not his best game. But Harrison Ingram is, making 5 threes and controlling the floor, and RJ Davis didn't even have to do all that much. And Michigan State was smart to double team Baycott, but Baycott's an experienced player. He passed out of that, and Michigan State paid for that dearly at times. So that's my overall take. Definitely a disappointing year for the Spartans. It's going to be interesting to see how they regroup, but nothing. There's no good feeling in East Lansing right now. Winning one tournament game was not the norm or expectation for this team, even going into this tournament. So,
Yeah, the this was the Michigan State that we've seen all year. You know, playing well for periods, but ending up coming up short against a team that is better than them. You know, we never doubted Izzo's ability to coach in game, but this roster is limited, and it didn't affect them in the round of 64 win against Mississippi State. But you had a couple of the role players regress to or water finding its level, if you will, and Hogard, who had a spectacular first game going 1 for 10 in this one. You said Tyson needed 25 to compete. He gets 24. Nobody called, did have a good game, 17 and 9, but, his matchup across the way, Ingram had 17 too, so you essentially play to a draw there. And R.J. Davis and Walker played to a draw, essentially, so it came down to the role players, I think, and Cormac Ryan with 14. He's been a really, really good ad for them, and this ended up being comfortable. But Michigan State had an 11-point lead in the first half, and like you said, they didn't call the timeout when North Carolina went on that huge run. Just seemed like they needed to treat that like a road game because it was in Charlotte, hour and a half, 2 hours away from Chapel Hill. But Izzo said, he's gonna get this team on a deep run, or he's gonna die trying. So we'll see what that.
and the last coach who said that in the Big Ten, a lot of good things happened after that. I believe it was 3 straight playoffs and national championships. So maybe Tom's onto something. Who knows?
So we'll see what happens next for Michigan State. They have a number of seniors, some who have more eligibility. Walker and Hall do have to go, but some other ones could do a COVID year either there or somewhere else. Iowa State beat Washington State by 11. Not a whole lot in that game. Once Iowa State started to hit some shots, they ended up victorious. The 11-14 game, Joe, that nobody expected was one of the better games of the day. North Carolina State 79, Oakland 73. The Grizzlies' run comes to an end, but Trey Townsend 30 points in the loss, and Golke 22 off the bench. Oakland provided a pretty good account of themselves in this tournament.
Totally, Sean. They are not shy to shoot. That is one thing I admired about them against Kentucky. It's their reputation in this area of Oakland County, which is the county I work in. And, even Josh Golke, 22 points. He was 6 of 17, all shots from 3-point.
Tough shots, too.
Yeah. This is a team that went down fighting, and I really have nothing bad to say about Oakland. I do think NC State, and it's, this is where it's proven, their depth didn't even have to do too much in this game. Only 7 guys went to the game. Their starters played most of the game. I mean, look at this, 42 minutes, 37, 37. I'll put it this way, Sean. They're lucky this is the second game of the weekend, because I think if this is the first game, they would pay dearly for it in the following 48 hours. But this is the NC State team we've seen the past 2 weeks. Dynamic offensively, drilling tough shots. And, for this game to go into overtime, I thought that was a little lucky, but Oakland's magic ran out, and really had is completely off to both teams. I have nothing bad to say. NC State, this is probably one of the more significant runs we've ever seen, and it could end by them losing by 30 in the next round. I would still say that just based on the last 7 games. And Oakland, you'll always have that win over Kentucky. I'm sure the St. Peter's run's going to be revert a lot more than Oakland's, but Josh Golke, probably no one knew who he was, and now he's probably going to be on a few talk shows. So good for him, and hoping guys like Trey Townsend either stay there or get some good NIL offers elsewhere.
Yeah, the Golke is cashing in on his NIL checks, by the way. He's doing some TurboTax and some other stuff in the hotel ballroom, wherever they're staying. And they put the tape down on the floor to do walkthroughs and stuff. He was doing an NIL shoot there, which is pretty funny. Got to cash those checks while the name's hot. But Trey Townsend, he was already going to be a pretty hot name in the portal, and apparently he has already told Oakland, before this whole thing, that he's going to play his 5th year somewhere else. But he's a really solid player. I think at the 4 position, he provides a lot that any team could use in this era. He actually hit a couple threes today. He doesn't usually do that, but They kept going to him. NC State, he did have 25 shots, but he scored 30 points, and that's pretty good efficiency, all things considered. And, Diarra fouled out covering him, and Middlebrooks fouled out covering him. And NC State were down to Jane Taylor to come in. They had to play 4 guards, but they just have enough to get over the line. DJ Burns, 24, 11, and 4. Their starting lineup just fits, and they've got a couple people off the bench who can make things work too. The key is that they're defending at a level that they haven't all year, these last 2 weeks, and that's why they're in the Sweet 16. Obviously, a little bit lucky that they do get to avoid the 3 seed, but you can only beat who's in front of you. Got a couple more games here, Joe, on Saturday before we get into today's preview. Texas and Tennessee wasn't one of the more pleasurable viewing experiences in the round of 32. Total rock fight. Tennessee gets across the line.
Yeah, and this was a game where I thought the stars, like especially Dalton Connect, will come out. And if you look at the stat line, having 18 points, but 7 of those were on free throws. I believe, I'm just looking this up here, went 5 of 18 from the field. Definitely not a signature performance from him, but Texas, 36% from the field, 7 of 23 from 3. That's just not good enough. And the fact this game got really close kind of gave me Rick Barnes flashbacks. I'm sure Mike Kumar had those too while he was whatever event Mike was at this week. I'm sure he had those flashbacks while watching on a tablet or bar somewhere. But Tennessee, I think this could have been their mulligan. I do not think they played even close to their best game. So they're going to need everything to beat Creighton. I think Texas's defense deserves a little credit for shutting down Tennessee, but Tennessee has to make more open shots, and I'm sure they will. I think this is just the game we play. So definitely the mulligan for Tennessee. I think they'll learn a lot from this game, and I don't think anyone in Knoxville should be complaining that they're going back to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I think they're lucky that they matched up against Texas, because the defense was good, but they're missing shots, and they survived and advanced. I mean, they played a really bad game, I think. Texas also. I mean, you have 2 players in the whole game that played more than 20 minutes that shot 50% from the field or better. And that's Josiah Jordan James, 4 for 8 in 28 minutes, and Tyrese Hunter, 6 for 11 for Texas. But he had a lot of missed shots here. Tennessee gets across the line. Looked like that it was going to be shaky for a little bit. A. Smith had a chance to tie it there at the end, but Texas goes out in the round of 32 in Rodney Terry's first full year in charge, and Tennessee moves on to play Creighton. Why don't we talk about that Creighton game, Joe? Against Oregon, double overtime. Creighton ends up winning by 13, but Oregon led this for most of the second half. They just ran out of gas at the end.
Creighton has often been touted as one of the best offenses in college basketball. I thought Oregon had one of the best offensive performances of yesterday, and it wasn't even close to enough, especially as they withered into the second overtime. I thought Creighton had plenty of chances to win in regulation and then in overtime. So I kind of thought if they didn't start hot the way they did in the second overtime, they could have been in serious trouble. But they didn't even leave that up for debate, Sean. 15 to 39 from 3. It's the 38.5% is not the impressive part. 15 to 39. They shot nearly 43-point shots across 55 minutes of basketball. That's really good, and they make it. They make it more often than they do not. So, having 4 starters essentially at or right below 20 points, that's how you get it done in the tournament. I do think they could have a little more for their bench, only giving 18 and 16 minutes total, so 34 between 2 guys. I think that could be something that could come back to bite them later on, but I think Creighton, Tennessee is probably going to be one of the highest scoring games we could see in this tournament, and I do think the dynamic shot making and action we saw in this game that made it the most entertaining game of the day, it has all the potential to be that in the Sweet 16 as well.
Yeah, Creighton has typically not had a lot of depth really under Greg McDermott ever. And this year they just don't foul. They hit 12 personal fouls in 50 minutes. And you could say, oh, well, the refs let them play. But they just don't foul, ever. And that's why their players are able to play the whole game. Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander both played 50 minutes, and Kalkbrenner played 49, which is pretty impressive. They and they were the ones who had something left in the tank in double overtime. Oregon did just have 2 points in the second extra period, but N'Faly Dante was a problem. 28 points, 20 rebounds, 32 points for Cousinard. Joe, Oregon only had 2 points that were not those two in the second half, and ultimately Greg McDermott trapped the ball screen, made someone else do something, and they didn't, and that's why they won the game.
Yeah. Signature performance from him. I do think at 59, for all the people screaming that he's going to leave Creighton, I think that's pretty unreasonable, but you never know. But enough of the coaching carousel talk, Sean. I think Creighton, a lot of people wrote off their dominating victory over UConn as just a fluke or an outlier. They're a really damn good team, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I thought Akron could have upset them. But
Well, they seemed like they were very. This was the last game of the day, and it was in Pittsburgh, so 10 p.m. local time tip. You could definitely see the crowd getting, or the players getting a little bit, not a lot of energy, but McDermott was as energized as I've ever seen him really on the sideline. Typically, he's pretty chill, but he got on the refs early, and I think that sort of message got to the players in the second half when they were losing that, hey, guys, like, the season's over if you don't figure this out. And they did. Alexander hits that shot or Shireman hits that shot to send it to overtime. And the longer the game went, unfortunately, the less chance Oregon had because they had to play a conference tournament last week and win it to get here. And, they got the first day, the draw Thursday, Saturday, rather than Friday, Sunday. And every day counts, especially when you've got players who, are playing a crazy number of minutes. But the other game yesterday, Joe, was Illinois. They took care of Duquesne. First Sweet 16 for them in quite a while.
yeah, really happy for Illinois. I think we said after their performance against Moorhead, they're going to have probably a little similar performance, and they'll be just fine. They played even better. The game was over at halftime, 50-26. I'll admit I didn't even watch the second half.
Yep, neither did
The
I.
second half, yeah, the second half, just based on what I saw from the highlights and reading the box score, reading the play-by-play, it was more of the same. Illinois clearly took their foot off the gas at the end. This is a very dangerous team, Sean. I think Iowa State presents a pretty fascinating matchup for the Illini. I think Olsenberger's going to be pretty creative defensively. He's going to try to limit Terrence Shannon. I think that game could be on Marcus Domask to win it, but still a week to go for that game, so plenty of time. What was your impression of the Illini?
Yeah, they were never losing this game. And I don't know if they were down like 2-0 early or something, but this was over really quick. And that's a great sign for Illinois. Like Oregon, they had to play conference tournament a couple days in a row last week. They get the Thursday, Saturday draw. They ultimately end up taking care of Moorhead. That game was close in the second half, but this one was over really quickly. Shannon and Damask only 32, 33 minutes. You get those guys on the bench early, and it's hard to say that we've seen a better team in this tournament so far than Illinois because Moorhead State played really well to hang around, and then they ultimately didn't. But Duquesne just beat BYU, who's a top 25 team, and then obviously maybe regressing to the mean a little bit here. But Illinois is in the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2005, I think. And,
Yep.
They certainly got on the luckier side of the draw, essentially playing 2 14 seeds to get there, but that's part of the tournament sometimes. In 20 years, when we're looking back at however far they get here, they're not going to say, well, you had a lucky draw. No, it doesn't matter.
Nope.
All right, Joe, we've got 8 more games on the docket for today. We're starting off with Colorado and Marquette. Shaka Smart, can he get to the Sweet 16?
If he doesn't, shame on him. I think he's had two probably top 7, top 8 teams the last 2 years. And the worst you could say is top 10 or 12. You can't go 2 straight years underachieving like that. I know last year was his. No, last year was his probably first full cycle at Marquette where he had his dudes in there and he could have fully developed his system and everything. They ran into Michigan State, so I'm gonna give him a mulligan there. You can't lose this game to Colorado. There's no way to go around that, Sean. They're only 4.5-point favorites, but they're 10 points better than me than Colorado is. And this game's at Gainbridge, I believe. So Marquette will and should have the majority of the fans in the building. Should be a semi-home game, which as we saw yesterday for North Carolina, definitely played an impact in the game. Um, yeah, there's no reason why Marquette shouldn't win this
Yeah, Colorado
5-0.
played in the first four. This will be their third game in 5 days, and Kolek looked, pretty good on
Yeah.
Friday. Like he maybe not 100%, but definitely not very limited. The next game at Gamebridge Joe is the big one, 2:40 on CBS. Utah State going on the road to Purdue. Can your Final Four pick pull off the upset?
It's going to come down to shot making, Sean. I think that's what we've seen Purdue fall for this year. If Utah State hits threes, they're going to have to be aggressive doing it, and they're going to have to contain one of Purdue's guards. If they do that, they can definitely win this game. I do think Zach Edey will dominate. I think he will have his typical, high 20, low 30 type performance. This is going to be a game where they cannot get punched in the mouth early. This could be a game similar to what we talk about in football, where other team has a surging offense, and if they get going, it's too late. You can't let Purdue get going too early, otherwise they're going to be out of it. I do think Utah State somehow, some way, will make enough shots and win this. This could be a very freezing cold take, but all I will say is last year I predicted that there would only be one Big Ten team in the Sweet 16. I predicted that this year. Um,
And there's already one.
there's already one, so I do not think there will be one more, and I'm going to stick with that pick. I'm going to stick with my Final Four pick. But
Wow.
I will say Purdue has the most pressure of anyone in the country today, and frankly, throughout this weekend. They're probably the most pressured team. Would you agree, Sean?
Probably, yeah. They got over the hump of the 16 seed, but if they lose here, that's another terribly, terrible underperformance in the big dance. And when you get to the Sweet 16 and you play a good team, stuff happens. If they do get bounced in the Sweet 16, I don't think like that's a total and utter disaster. It's just part of the March Madness, but they are a better team than Utah State. They should win this game by a lot. I think they will in front of a home crowd. Osabor and their other center, I think Johnson is his name on Utah State. I think Edey's going to foul or get them in foul trouble. And the guards for Utah State did have a really good game against TCU, but for them to do that twice in a row, I don't think is going to happen. And they're going to have to because they're certainly going to lose the forward battle. They're going to have to outplay Fletcher Loyer and Braden Smith, and I don't think that they can do that. James Madison Duke, 5:15 at Barclays Center. Both teams look pretty solid in the round of 64. What do you got here?
First thing I want to comment is I think the crowd of this game could be very interesting. I think Duke, is a national brand. They'll have fans wherever they go. James Madison has a lot of good kids from New Jersey and New York. So it's going to be interesting to see how the James Madison faithful turns out. That's just something to keep an eye out for. Other than that shot, I think James Madison's going to need a repeat of what they did on Friday, and I do not know how sustainable that is. I do think Duke is going to roll in this one. I think, like a lot of teams, especially Duquesne, I think their magic is going to run out, unfortunately. I think Duke runs away with this one. What do you think? What do you think, Sean?
I actually think this game will be pretty close. I don't think James Madison did anything fluky at all against Wisconsin. They didn't make a ton of threes. Defensively, they were good. And I think Duke, is kind of similar in their makeup to Wisconsin and James Madison, really. And whenever that happens, I think you got to give every team a shot. Duke's 6.5-point favorites. I think I'd probably give them more than a 60% chance to win this game, but I'm going to go with the Dukes to win this one, not Duke.
Okay.
Clemson Baylor 6:15 TNT. Baylor 4.5-point favorites. Clemson totally smacked New Mexico last time out. Baylor cruised to a victory against Colgate. Yeah, Colgate.
Yep.
Giving Clemson any shot here?
I give them a shot, but I do not think it's going to be much of one. I think Baylor is a team. I think Clemson left a little too much, and I hate saying this because they thoroughly dominated on the scoreboard. There were times where their offense would go stagnant, and Baylor's a team you really cannot do that against. It's a very experienced, poised team. As Mike says, Bears by a billion, so give me the Bears. What's your take, Sean?
Yeah, I think they match up really well versus Clemson. I think they win this. I could see it by a lot. PJ Hall and Girard, and so they could keep them in the game and maybe sneak this one. But I don't think If Clemson wins, I think it'll be neck and neck the entire way, and they'll just get it at the end. And I think if Baylor wins, it'll be pretty convincing. So I think the Bears will win by 8 to 10. Grand Canyon at Alabama or against Alabama 7-10 CBS. Alabama's 6.5-point favorites. Not a lot of big spreads here, Joe. So we should have some good games today. The Lopes look pretty good against St. Mary's. They just had better athletes than them. Probably not going to be the case against Alabama. Any chance that the Lopes slow down this high-powered Crimson Tide offense?
I think the only offense in this game, I think the only way Alabama slows down in this game is if they slow themselves down. We've seen that before, especially against San Diego State and UCLA in the Sweet 16 of the COVID year, where NATO's offenses have gone quiet for a period of time. But even if that happens, Sean, Grand Canyon is going to have to make a lot of shots to win this game. I do not think if this game becomes a firefight that Grand Canyon has any shot to win. So give me the Crimson Tide, and you're gonna have NATO's right back to Sweet 16.
I don't think Grand Canyon. I picked them to go to the Sweet 16 in quite a bit of my brackets, but I just think they're going to play right into Alabama's hands because what they do well, Alabama does better. And maybe you have an awful shooting day from Mark Sears and stuff like that, but I think Alabama wins, and I think this might be kind of by a lot. I think we'll tell pretty early on if Grand Canyon's up for the fight on 2 days or on 1 day's rest against a team that is as fast as any. Northwestern and UConn from the Barclays Center at 7:45 on True TV. We've got UConn 13.5-point favorites. Are you giving Boo Buie any chance of taking his Northwestern team close in this one?
I would give Boo Buie no shot to do such a thing. I think he's going to need a lot of help, whether it's Nicholson, Barnheiser, Langborg, I think did his part. If he could have any kind of repeat of that, it still wouldn't even be close to enough. So I think you're going to need 3 cats with 20 points or close to it. And down low, they're at such a disadvantage depth-wise. As I said, this isn't a knock on Northwestern, and whenever I'm talking about anyone against Connecticut, it's just that they're better. I do think the guards can hang with Connecticut for quite a while. I think down low, and as we get into the second half, you're going to see UConn start to take over. I think that 13.5 is just right. It wouldn't shock me if Northwestern was only down 5 to 6 at halftime. They could hang with really good teams, as we saw with Purdue this year. I ultimately think, though, Connecticut is going to be overwhelming, and I think the significant Husky home court advantage in Brooklyn will play an impact in this game. I think this is a game where Northwestern probably hangs around, probably is never down a massive amount, like probably down 8 to 10 points, 10 minutes into the second half, but eventually they're gonna not make enough shots. UConn's just gonna take over, and UConn could score in spurts. So you could see a 10-point deficit turn into an 18-point deficit very quickly. So give me the Huskies. I don't know about the cover, but I think they'll win by double digits at the very least.
Yeah, your scenario, Joe, I think is probably on the better side for Northwestern. There's a chance that UConn is up 30 to 13 10 minutes into this game and it's over. And there's a chance that Northwestern hangs around, and maybe the longer they hang around, the more they can believe that they can actually do it. But there's a reason UConn has 3 losses, and in those 3 games, they have gotten like full epic 40-minute awesome performances from those teams on their home floor. And I just don't think Northwestern is capable of a 40-minute kind of onslaught. And, they might try and keep it close. Chris Collins does have his work cut out for him here. I think you need every player on Northwestern to have a really good game and hope you're there at the end and see what happens. But I can't see it by the third quarter of the game mark, 10 minutes left in the second half. If UConn's not up double digits, I think I'll be a little bit surprised. The last 2 to end off the day, we got Texas A&M and Houston at 8:40 p.m. Eastern Time on TNT. This is a rematch from previously in the season. Houston did beat Texas A&M by 4 at the Honda Center, which is the home of the Houston Rockets. Wade Taylor did have 34 points in that game, and they still didn't win. Texas A&M coming off a great offensive performance, giving them any chance to knock off Houston?
I give them a chance, but truthfully, Sean, I thought the only 1-8, 1-9 matchup this weekend where there was any decent chance or a puncher's chance at an upset was Michigan State. So I would not lie to the viewership and say that I'm giving the Aggies much of a shot. I think Houston is going to thoroughly dominate through most of this game. And yeah, this game is another one where you explain the UConn Northwestern game that could get out of hand very quickly if Texas A&M does not make shots quickly. So give me Houston. They're also in my Final Four. So give me the Cougars.
Yeah, Texas A&M has been so inconsistent all year. I mean, they do have 14 losses, and they have rarely backed up a good performance with another good one. And they had one of their best against Nebraska. I think Houston, maybe Texas A&M can stick around and make some shots, but as good as the Nebraska defense is, it is not the same as Kelvin Sampson's defense in Houston. Length, size, they're going to have to shoot over it, and they are not good at three-pointers. I know they made a lot of them against Nebraska. I think that they will regress to the mean here, which typically does happen. You want a short turnaround and stuff like that. I've got Houston by, as much as 20, to be honest here. It could be ugly. Last game of the day, Yale against San Diego State, 9:40 on TBS. Yale definitely stole one from Auburn in the first round, and San Diego State limped to the finish line against UAB. I think San Diego State, that was their bad performance. I think they'll roll here against Yale.
Yes, I'm gonna give Brian Dutcher the benefit of the doubt in March. I do like what James Jones, the Yale coach, said that they can compete with anyone. He's not wrong. They can compete in this game. I do think Jaden Ledee will dominate. I do not think Yale has even close to the firepower to compete with San Diego State if they get some semblance of hot, which is what they're eventually going to get. They've had two straight games, the Mountain West title game and the game against UAB, where they had probably C- to D+ performances, and luckily it did not cost them their season. So give me the Aztecs in this one. I think 5.5 is a pretty interesting line. I would lean toward the cover. That San Diego State would cover that. So give me the Aztecs, and they're going to go right back to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, it just seems like we talked about Auburn Yale, and Auburn, we talked about Yale having a good starting five, but after that, it gets a little dicey. Auburn had one of their starters ejected 3 minutes into the game, so that decreases their depth a little bit. And Pulikitis had 28. Now, he's a good player, but he doesn't do that often. And Auburn still had a chance to win it at the end. So, I think Jadon Ledee is going to be tough for Danny Wolf and Yale to guard. And if Danny Wolf gets in foul trouble, they don't really have another five. So, there's a lot of ways San Diego State wins this easily, and only a couple that Yale do, and they did it last time. Can they do it again? I think they can certainly hang around, and I put this game near tied at halftime, but we'll see. As good as Auburn is, Janai Broome is a little bit of a different player than Jadon Ledee, so we'll see what happens there. But that's the 8 games on Sunday, so that's all we have for him today, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time here on the Sports Daily College Basketball